Good day, everyone. This is Moira Patterson from the IEEE Standards Association, and welcome to our session that we have put together on designing online and offline experiences with children in mind. We will get started now. And again, it is my honor to be hosting this session with two very distinguished experts and speakers. Before we get started, I just want to make everybody aware that this session is being recorded, so please be aware of that. We also look forward to a very interactive session. Today, we have two experts who will share a lot of information from their experiences, but in the second half, Katina will also be walking us through a collaborative session. So that's going to be highlights that I hope everyone will enjoy, and we look forward to your collaboration here. So as we get started, let me introduce myself, and there we go, and what we are doing in this space. I'm Moira Patterson with the IEEE Standards Association, and IEEE's mission is to advance technology for humanity. And one really important aspect that we've been looking at for the last few years with a big focus, and that we are all now seeing heavily reflected in the media, is the question of childhood in today's day and age in this connected and online world. And one of the big questions is children need a space to grow up, to learn, to evolve, to go through the different phases of their age groups, their evolving capacities, and they need to be able to do that in a safe way, in a trusted way, have the privacy that they need, and all of the things that we had when we were children. But with the introduction of cyberspace, with connected tools, with always on tracking, devices everywhere, this is encroaching on a lot of these things. So while there are a lot of opportunities, and they really are great opportunities to bring education to remote areas where education may not be available, opportunities for telehealth, again, in remote areas, or so many other great opportunities, customized or personalized learning for children with special needs. There also are risks, and the risks are not always as obvious as the benefits are. Of course, lately we've been hearing a lot about risks, about privacy, about contact from strangers, so safety and security, and also about mental and physical well-being, about what are children exposed to in this online and connected world, what is tracked about them, etc. So this is a really big space, and it's a really critical space as we think about the future. Children are our future, and the sustainability of our human society and human well-being. So IEEE has really been looking at engaging with the many existing experts in this field and the different spaces from around the world, and engaging with existing communities and growing the community within IEEE doing work in this space. And I'm very happy today to be joined. We are on 3 continents, our team is here. I'm based in the US, and my 2 speakers here, Nishan is based in Finland and Katina is based in Australia. So we really see the global nature of the concerns around it and of the connectivity, and also of the finding of solutions. So just a brief note about what we are doing, and you will hear more about these activities as Nishan and Katina speak, but we have a number of efforts that look at finding solutions. IEEE is traditionally a community of engineers and technologists. You may know us for things from, the power grid and transformers and substations to things like Wi-Fi and Ethernet on the connectivity side. But with technology evolving and being part of everyday life, even more, there has been an increasing focus on building the communities around ethical engagements and socio-technical impact. And here I am just providing a snapshot of some of the activities we've been doing in the last few years. So you see here we've been collecting data governance applied case studies. We work with technologists, but with our increased multidisciplinary colleagues from other fields increasingly to make sure we look at the socio-technical impacts. But IEEE, of course, brings the technical angle to that debate. The technology experts, but they need to be communicating with the child development experts, with the privacy experts to address and find scalable solutions. We have a number of standards activities here around data governance, age-appropriate digital services, but also some are focused more in specific domains, such as a standard around inclusion, dignity, and privacy in online gaming. And dignity, human dignity is really a centerpiece of these programs because that is the foundation. Our mission is to advance technology for humanity. So that for humanity piece is really critical and foundational. And so we are, some of the work that I'm highlighting here is not only based on children specifically, but at the bottom, I also am couching it in the context of our broader socio-technical impact work. We have a model process for ethical concerns during system design. This standard was just approved last month and has launched and is really a foundational standard. And then we also have one focused on metrics for well-being. We talk about human well-being, well-being of children, well-being of all of us. But the incentives in the technology development, if they are all focused on the financial bottom line, that is what will be reflected first or prioritized first. So the idea of looking at well-being metrics is we have to have ways to create metrics that measure the well-being factors such as physical well-being, such as mental well-being, happiness, a safe and a healthy environment around you. All of these things, we need ways to measure them. And so those types of efforts are a critical backdrop and context for the work we are doing around children. So with that, I would like to introduce briefly the other two speakers. As I said, we are here from 3 continents today, but I'm very happy to have Nishan Chelvachandran here. He is the chair of the IEEE Trustworthy Technical Implementations of Children's Online and Offline Experiences activity, and he will speak from that program and his expertise. That program is very broad and looking at a number of different subfields. And then we also have Professor Katina Michael, who is the chair of the IEEE P2089 Standards Working Group. And she will be speaking on the design side and also from that standard. I did not put their other affiliations, which are lengthy and impressive, and their experiences. So I encourage you to, of course, look them up because it's really inspirational to see all the great things they've done. But for today, we will start with Nishan's talk, and I'll hand over the presentation to Nishan.
Thank you, Moira. And yes, I agree. I think if the audience were to look up mine and Professor Michael's backgrounds, we could probably do a whole presentation or session just on our on our bios. But it's a pleasure to be here and be here virtually and speak to you all. Of course, I used to live in Haldeman County in Waterloo, Guelph region many years ago. So so I have a bit of an affiliation, but I get a nice sense when I'm able to engage with the community there. But anyhow, I think I'll just as a bit of a pretext, being British, I tend to deliver my thinking in somewhat of a convoluted way. So my slides are going to be quite high level and really just more as a prompt for me, because otherwise I might end up talking about who knows what. I mean, it's always a surprise, but hopefully it's something relevant. But I think the really interesting thing that Moira just mentioned, of course, was the human, or at least what I would define as the human condition. And I think we're very much at the intersection of technology and humanity. And previously, I mean, you wouldn't think, given my graying beard, that I'm actually a millennial. So I was very much born into the early kind of stages of gaming with Commodore 64 and everything else. But through my childhood, technology was still very much a bubble or an abstraction, so to speak, from everyday life. So I had my everyday physical life going to school, and I would come home and put the computer on and play my platform games or whatever, and then Nintendos came out, and it was very much a part of my life, much as other things were, but it wasn't really fully integrated into my everyday being, so to speak. And this is a very interesting thing because, as we all know, the world has accelerated, the world has changed, and we're in this very interesting, I refer to it as, I use the term interesting. For me, it's actually quite dangerous. And I think we actually need to be, focusing and doing some stuff about it. So Moira, if you can go on to the next slide, just so I can maintain contain my waffling. Yes, thank you. So, yeah, so as I said, we're talking about security. My background is in cybersecurity. Just very briefly on my bio. So before I did all of this stuff, I was a police officer, and I was very active in the operational side of cybersecurity and this kind of thing. So I very much view this side of things from the operational space, but also from the dystopian space. So when I say the operational space, you think law enforcement, and you think, of course, that law enforcement has the best interests of people, and of course the technologies and mechanisms that are used are all for good, which for the most part they are. But of course, with any of these technologies, there's also a darker side to it. And a lot of the time, the deployments and the uses of these technologies are, well, dystopian is a light way of putting it, but they are potentially quite dangerous. And again, historically, these deployments and these uses of technology have been for specific purposes, and they've been tools, a means to an end. But as we've gone to where we are now, there is this merge. So when we're thinking about as I mentioned, the evolution of gaming, for me, we think about the accessibility of devices. So if we think about gaming, as I just mentioned, when I was growing up compared to gaming now, where the majority of the children in the Western or globally North-like societies have access to a smartphone, a computer, or both. And then, of course, having an internet connection. So we have online gaming and MMOs and huge virtual environments in which children and young people and adults like myself can engage in. But then, of course, when you're thinking about how that gaming has evolved, it's moved from, again, this abstraction into almost a part of being in a way, or being fully immersed in gaming and interaction. And the interesting thing that needs to be looked into, and I can't go into too much detail because I don't have much time, but is how these interactions are actually affecting children and young people. Because, of course, how they're interacting in a virtual environment versus a physical environment is very different. And I think what we all know with the COVID-19 pandemic is the fact that this has very much accelerated and exploded these things. Again, online gaming, a huge market, a huge, I guess, hobby, activity, lifestyle for some people, but now it has very much become mainstream. But I'm mentioning gaming because that's the obvious one. But if we, just kind of venture further out, of course, when we're talking about children and technology, another obvious one is education. And of course, when we're thinking about with the pandemic, straight away, or well, depending on where you were, there was the shift to remote learning and doing all courses online, on the computer, on the phone, or whatever it is, distance learning. And what was interesting with that, of course, is depending on where you were based and the society you're in, and of course your social economic status, would determine really how you were able to engage. So, I mean, I use Finland as a good example because Finland has, purportedly one of the better education systems in the world, and a lot of children in primary schools here all had devices issued by their schools anyway, pre-pandemic. So when they went to a remote learning setup, this wasn't anything, untoward or different. It was just everyday business. They just spent more time at home. But then, of course, if you look at, I'll use India as an example for a global South country. Of course, statistics say that 99% of Indian homes have electricity. But then if you actually look at the studies by the Ministry of Rural Development, actually 16% of houses have electricity for 1 to 8 hours a day. Only 47% of homes have electricity for more than 12 hours. And then actually, even the populace, 24% of Indians have a smartphone, and only 11% of households have a computer. So it's one thing to be easy to switch to remote learning and devices, but then what do you do when a society or community doesn't have the infrastructure to even facilitate that? And then, of course, straight away, we're already broadening the digital divide. And this isn't taking into account a lot of the other social economic factors and everything else. So again, I'm really doing high level points here. Toys, of course, toys comes hand in hand with gaming, but of course with toys leads into social interaction. Because again, I would say sitting down, playing a board game with your family, you have a standard set of interactive rules that are governed by your household and how you've been brought up, whatever else. I'm not an anthropologist, so I can't really go into that in too much detail. But then if you use that analogy and then think of when you're gaming online and you're thrown into an MMO environment where there are 100 other people, if I use Fortnite as an example, 99 other players, and you have no idea who they are, where they're from, how old they are, and it's very much the Wild West, and it's luck of the draw who you talk to and who you're exposed to and what you're exposed to. And thinking as well from my background, from a policing or law enforcement point of view, there's the element of exploitation. And of course, radicalization and some other very scary, darker elements to this type of exposure. But with the social interactions, of course, then there's an interesting question around how do these interactions actually change us as us children, young people as humans? And Moira mentioned the human condition as well, and I talk a lot about cybersecurity, but for me, cybersecurity also, I think, leans into, human security, so to speak, I guess, or when you start to think about mental, emotional security and social, I was about to say social security, but of course that's a different political beast. But I guess the sustainability and the protection of the human condition and human development. And I think one of the big problems that we have is that we don't necessarily fully know or fully understand the changes that are happening in the development of children. I think we're going to have actually a generation of young people as they get older that are going to have a lot of challenges that we might not have anticipated. And this really, I think, is the key, because of course I'm using some different analogies or anecdotes around, analog board games versus online gaming versus, when I was a child to the modern day thing. But really, I think what the overarching theme here is very much that a lot of these systems were designed or created without their end implementation being considered. So even when you think of social media, again, I mentioned I was in Canada years ago. So just to give you some context, when I was living in Canada, that was when Facebook was an invitation-only platform. I'm sure some people listening won't even have any context as to what that was. But very much, university to university invitation platform, and it was truly to connect with people that you might know within the academic space and, true social media at its core. And then if you think of what Facebook is now, and we look to 2 or 3 weeks ago when there was the outage, and it seemed that society, tripped over and a lot of people couldn't function for a matter of days. And we have a lot of investigations and things into Facebook and other social media platforms. But I think it's very clear that a lot of these considerations were never, they weren't even considered at the time of creation or of design. And it's only been until something breaks, to to quote Admiral Grace Hopper, one of the foremothers of computer science, when she said it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is to seek permission. So from a true computer scientist point of view, go and do it, and then if it breaks, apologize, and if it works, fantastic. Which again works in abstraction, but now when we're dealing with technologies that have really integrated and infiltrated into people's lives and into the societal construct, it can be problematic. So Moira, if you can jump onto the next slide. So with this program, of course, we mentioned the trustworthy technological implementations for children's online and offline experiences. And I think that's the first time I've ever said the title of the project in one go without stammering or getting confused. The idea of this project really was to take the expertise, the know-how from IEEE. Of course, Moira mentioned I refer to them as the greatest hits when we think of the Wi-Fi standards and all of the other technological standards. But we take these very essential technological backbones that unify and really support the technologies that we use. We take that expertise, but we also blend it with really leading edge pioneering research and academic expertise and knowledge that Professor Michael and her peers bring to the mix. And of course, other researchers and faculties and universities are available. I don't want to be biased. But taking in the academic know-how, but then also looking at it from a market perspective, because one of the challenges we have is that I would say it's very easy to, from an academic perspective, to say, X, Y, Z, you must do this, you must do that, this is good, this is bad. But then, of course, you have the market perspective where, there is a need to drive the economy and for businesses to have, to do their thing. But as we all know, if we leave things to be fully market regulated or self-regulated, folks giving themselves pats on the back, again, we might end up in a situation that we don't necessarily want to be in. But the point being is that we really need to bring these different perspectives together. And of course, the public office or public sector representation and NGO representation to make an inclusive and diverse ecosystem of thinking, but also not just thinking about it, because we all think about it and I can talk about about it until the cows come home, but to see what's out there, think about it, but then also try and find tangible outputs. And as Moira suggested or mentioned, the scalable solutions. How do we actually take thinking point A and B and make output C and D? So within this program, we're soon going to be launching, and I do hope that everyone here who is interested does reach out to us to see where they can assist or engage. We're really putting together experts who can engage in this space and help us define what we're trying to do. But I've listed here just some of the things that we're looking at. So of course, looking at data. So the data of, when I say data, again, very broad, but looking at what data is generated by these applications, these games, these platforms, and not just what is being generated, but how is it being used? Where is it going and everything else? Data agency, data sovereignty, really. And then these are all, of course, huge conversations when we're talking about data sovereignty. But then thinking of algorithmic systems and AI, of course, a lot of these processes as well, a lot of the time, with the algorithms in their black boxes aren't explainable. And a lot of the time that, a lot of the devs don't even know how the decisions or predictions have been made. And when we think of now the decision-making processes that are algorithmically generated, and thinking back from a child perspective, when a child is interacting with a computer or a game and decisions are being made and certain information is being fed to the child based on some algorithmic mathematical equation that you use from other data sources. The question then to be asked is, well, how good is that algorithm? What data is it basing its decision on? Has it got the best interest of the child, or has it got the interest of the company? What is it trying to push and whatnot? That goes hand in hand, of course, with the other points about digital trust and privacy and security. Looking at the big legislative conundrum that we have, where a lot of data protection legislation around the world is looking at data from an adult perspective, or from, I guess, a parental perspective, but not necessarily a child perspective. Looking at the UK, the UK government last year created the age-appropriate design code of practice, which I think was a very good starting point. It's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction, and other governments are looking at it. Canada has, of course, a data protection act that I think it brought out last year, or the tail end of last year, but it really failed to fully acknowledge children within that scenario, which I think is quite problematic. But these are some of the discussions that we want to have in this ecosystem. But then, of course, looking at the certification and side of things, because for us, I think it's important when we get this thinking together that we can actually highlight best practice and outcomes, but actually be able to allow, I say, the average person, the lay person that, is, whether it's a parent or a legal guardian, or even the child or young person, to be able to understand and know what is safe and what isn't. And we think of, I use the analogy of the fair trade mark that you get on food, and you know if certain fruits or whatever it is, fit a set standard or a set of guidelines and principles, and they get that stamp. And that's something that we're thinking about in terms of the deployment and use and design of technologies that are deployed in the child-centric space, to be able to fit an agreed set of criteria and principles. So Moira, if you could just jump onto the next slide. So as I mentioned there, these are some more areas here about AI for kids. So with AI for kids, I mentioned a couple of areas, but UNICEF and the government of Finland, they're releasing actually the second version of their children and AI policy guidance, which again is really exploring the uses of algorithms and AI in the child-centric space, and that is a very interesting read. Profilings and dark patterns, that is, I think, really at the core of trustworthy technologies, especially when we're looking at dark patterns and how a lot of the apps and games and algorithms are designed to essentially exploit children. And that might sound a bit harsh, but when I say exploit, meaning encourage the user to engage more within the platform, and whether to spend more money or to share more data. So I think it dehumanizes the experience, treating the user as a cash cow. Let's try and get as much as we can out of them, and who cares about the expense? If they don't like it, they can leave the game, and we can get 100 or 100 million more people to do that. And unfortunately, with a lot of these game setups, it is very much unregulated, and it is a wild west. And games and fads come and go, and to manage all of that is quite difficult. But just mindful of time, I'm going to whiz through the rest. Impact assessments, of course. Again, these are all, as I'm building a bit of an understandable picture here about the different facets and different perspectives and the sorts of things that we need to consider and work on. But one of the things I touched upon at the beginning, which should talk about the digital divide and the global north and the global south. One thing I think that's also important, to use a term from, I guess, GDPR, when we talk about privacy by design. And then for me, as a cybersecurity, I think about security but by design. But really here, we're talking now about safety and really inclusivity by design. So rather than building something and then seeing if it works or not, and then trying to plug in something to as a band-aid solution, we need to be incorporating these things from the get-go, from conception. And one of the points for me that I think is really important, especially when we talk about digital disparity, is also looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion. But also, I think what's very important is from an Indigenous people's perspective. I mean, again, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, and there are experts that are far more knowledgeable about that space than myself. But I think looking at some of the areas such as data sovereignty and accessibility of the technology again, but also looking at how the technology influences traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expression. I think one of the big challenges with Indigenous peoples and their communities and the struggles they face, other than integration and persecution and historical challenges, is very much the protection and the security, the protection and the security of the human condition, the protection and the security of their culture, and how do we, how is technology technology being a potential force for good, but how is it actually affecting that? Is it affecting that or not? Or how can we actually use that? How can we actually use technology, if we're talking about the best practices and the better practices, how can we also use that in a way that can safeguard, I think some very, very important tenets of the human condition and human civilization, that is in indigenous peoples. But of course, it's all well and good for me to be, waving the flag and talking about indigenous peoples and how important it is, but that's really where the engagement comes in, and that we really need to engage with different stakeholders, different people from different communities, different areas of expertise and experience to really be able to engage in this. And really the ultimate end goal as well, other than the certification and whatnot, is to really build this co-design inclusive development ecosystem, so that to quote Katina from one of our previous talk, she said a line that really has stuck in my mind for months, which was made with kids, not for kids. And to me, I think that's really, really, at the heart of all of this, that if we're going to be designing or promoting the design of safe and trustworthy technologies for children and young people, then we need children and young people to be engaged and involved in that development. And that it's not, yes, we are a part of it as well, but we're missing a huge part if we're not inclusive and trying to figure out what is actually affecting children. Because of course the children's experience is very different. My experience on a gaming platform is very different to a young person. So that being said, I think hopefully I've given quite a colourful, broad stroke overview of what we're trying to do here. Like I said, it is very broad. There's a lot to do. The topics that I highlighted there, it's not limited to that. And of course, we will rely on the experts and the people that we engage with to tweak that or add additional content or whatever it might be. And this is going to be a rolling process. But it's really great that the IEEE Standards Association is really acting as the platform to bring together these parties and to really push forward this type of responsible and sustainable innovation. So that being said, I think the last slide that Moira can move to is just a little contact thing, but I'm sure all of the housekeeping and all of that stuff will be available to the viewers. So with that being said, I think I can, if I've probably gone over my time, I don't know, but I'll hand back to Moira. Thank you.
Thank you, Nishan, and thank you for really this, broad stroke overview, and also for really highlighting all the different facets that we need to think about, from geographic considerations, from other environmental considerations, to also cultural and other topics that are really important. And I think we all know that they have not traditionally been reflected to the level that they need to be. And so thank you for putting those on the map. And I know Katina will also will be building onto this and getting more specific as well. And to let her share her presentation, I will stop sharing now. And again, I just encourage everyone to consider joining the work that Nishan was highlighting. And over to you, Katina.
Well, thank you so much, Moira. It's always a pleasure to co-present with you. One thing I know about children online and the stakeholders who are working towards ensuring a future where children do feel cared for, safe, and their privacy is protected is that we are building a community of carers. Everyone who is in this chain or in this network, all the stakeholders, that's what you hope for. And I see that in Moira, I see that in Nishan, I see that in our Managing Director at IEEE Standards Association, Konstantinos Perchelios. I see this in so many people, John C. Havens with the P7000 series, and that's what you want. You want people who care. Without rushing quickly to the next presentation, because we're going to see many in the days to come, I actually want to reflect deeply on what Nishan talked about. And we're going to do that with a song. I've chosen a song by one of my favorite artists, Sami Yusuf, and it's Give the Young a Chance. And I want us to think about, as we reflect, the main points that Nishan shared with us about how do we give the young a chance. So some inspirational music here. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll play only part of the song.
There's a river that flows all the way to kingdom come. Through the sandstorms where the high wind blows, desert rose does bloom. Please help me give the young a chance. Lead them in the dance, my people. Give the young a chance to change their circumstance. And so, it's written as the moon shall turn the tides and as the stars shall light your right. Don't listen to the words of fools, the young. I know they are the Jews. Deeds I've done, what I'll become, treasures I will find. Nourishment I do receive, can't help but believe. The road is long, I shall stay strong. Please hear my song, help me give the young a chance. Lead them in the dance, my brothers, give the young a chance. Lead them in the dance, my sisters, give the young a chance. Change their circumstance. And so, it's written as the moon shall turn the tides and as the stars shall light your right. Don't listen to the words of fools, the young. I know they are the
I hope that little interlude helped you to be inspired by Nishan's words. I'll start by saying building with children means that they're with us. And today we don't have any children with us, not that I can see on the participants list. One of my favorite user experience designers, Mark Hurst, president of Creative Good for the last 25 years, an MIT graduate, always talks about designing for real people. And he recollects many stories where he talks with clients who don't talk to real people. And if our end users are in fact children and we don't make contact with children in the development and design of our new systems or our adaptation of our existing ones, then most likely we're building for fake children. And we're building fake products and services and systems. We never ask them, what do you want? And what do you need? And what don't you like? Having spoken to many children, my own included, nephews, nieces, children of friends, anecdotally at least, having spoken to many young university students between the ages of 18 and 20, many of them feel they're being coerced into this digital environment. One young man who was interviewing me actually for a school assignment said to me, Katina, I believe we're being coerced and manipulated into using these digital products. My friends and I don't want a bar of it. And then I hear other stories of children saying how wonderful it is to collaborate with people across the world. But we shouldn't be stuck in boardrooms hypothesizing what children might like or need. We should be out there at the interface, with new methodologies, new design approaches, which are inclusive. That was the main thrust of Nishan's talk. And if we can remember that we're building for real children, not fake children, then possibly we might get somewhere that's special. And by being inclusive of other stakeholders, not just children, but we are talking to parents, we are talking to other stakeholders, for example, educational systems, teachers, heads of schools. We are talking to regulators, those who are there to ensure privacy is upheld. We are talking to law enforcement agencies. And in fact, these are the kinds of stakeholders, about 30 different types, that were invited in the working group on the proposed IEEE P2089 standard that we hope will come into fruition soon, who knows. But we've worked our way across the different phases of standards development, and that's what I briefly want to talk to you about today before we head into Jamboard and do a collective activity. Before we get to Jamboard, while I'm talking to you, I want you to think about which stakeholder you'll be as we're going through this design process in terms of questions that might be proposed to you if you were actually in charge, or one of the people in charge of contributing inclusively to the design of a new service. You could keep your current affiliation. If you're an educator in a particular discipline, all are welcome, but you might want to wear the hat of a law enforcement agent during this design process and play the devil's advocate. You may well be a member of a non-government organization, like a privacy non-government organization. You may want to be a standards body, just like IEEE. And so as we're going through the design exercise in about 15 minutes or so, I want you to put on that persona. And so in the absence of children, maybe perhaps, dare I say, someone may wish to simulate through the eyes of a child using empathic intelligence. Remember, that's just a simulation. We could never simulate this in the real world unless we were a child. We would require a child with us through the design process, and not just one, but many, but we'll get to that in a moment. So let me share my screen and talk to you a little bit about what I've been up to over the last 2 years on this amazing journey of the P2089. But first, for those of you who are not versed in standards, what are they? It's a level of quality or attainment. And why do we need standards? Well, they're used as a measure or a norm or a model in comparative evaluations. So we're evaluating something. We're creating a norm, perhaps, if we're part of this process in some way. We're measuring something against something. Sometimes people talk about compliance. P2089 is not really about compliance and enforceability. It's more like a guideline. You may want to conform, but not comply entirely. And it's our hope to present something that is not like your least benchmark, but rather seeing how children can flourish through this design process, ensuring harm does not come to them. And so standards exist at many levels. Many of you would have heard about ISO standards at the international level. At the regional level, there are different types of standards, like the IEEE standard, the European Telecommunications Standards Institute. I know when I was in telecommunications some 25 years ago, that we always used to talk about the IEEE and the ANSI standards. So the European versus the American, they never really joined up. And that was always a cause of drama for us. But it depended which region we were working in. And at the national level, again, we have a different set of standards, like the British Standards Institution, the BSI, which has a whole bunch of standards on risk, for example, but many other things. And you can have risk standards at the international, regional, and national level. And sometimes standards bodies talk to one another. So the IEEE, for example, feeds into ISO on occasion because they're working at a global level and providing leverage for one another. So IEEE Standards Association is not just a standards setting organization. It's a standards developing organization. And they collaborate globally with a number of big names like ISO, ETSI, the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, IEC, the IETF task force, and so forth. And SDOs may be accredited to develop standards using open and transparent processes. They're really taken seriously. The platform that IEEE Standards Association use is transparent for all to be able to view. If you're a voting member, you need to have certain permissions, but it's a process that is exacting and no shortcuts can be taken to ensure that robust consultation has happened and vested interests don't take over a standard, for example. So they're global SDOs, they coordinate, they harmonize. There's no duplication of effort when standards development organizations work together, and they're highly marketable. The process looks something like this. It may have changed. I pulled this off a slide from a year ago, but literally you have an idea, you propose that idea to a standards committee, the project is approved, it sort of becomes like, gets a PAR, P-A-R, they develop a standard, it goes to ballot, the standards board approves, it's published, it's tested, it's amended perhaps, and then we go through a cycle again, if required. An adaptation, that's why you see a .1 or a .2 in standards. So why a standard just for children online? Think about that. Are we opening up a can of worms? What about a standard for those who are cognitively impaired or those who are of non-English speaking, English as a second language? But why a standard for children online? Well, quite plainly, about 30 years ago, the United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner put forward the CRC, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And if you read this convention, 54 articles, 192 countries have signed this out of 194 possible members. It's about getting behind kids and ensuring no harm is done to them and ensuring their freedom and their rights are upkept. So Article 13 states, the child shall have the right to freedom of expression. This right shall include freedom to seek, receive, and impart information and the ideas of all kinds, regardless of frontiers, either orally, in writing or in print, in the form of art, or through any other media of the child's choice. And if you go through the different articles, even Article 14, even if you go down further, Article 23, what you find is that the word freedom is repeated constantly, but we can't uphold a child's freedom if we're web scraping their data from the age in which they can hold up a device and click. In fact, a lot of our investigations into uberviolence identified that gaming companies were even looking at kill strikes, maneuvers and strategies that different age groups would take. In fact, different individuals in the same household. Gaming companies could determine whether it was the single user actually playing the game or 15 different persons with the one avatar. But they were looking at basically whether they could identify high-end users for in-gaming purchases and much more. And so when that data is collected from the age that a child can actually interact with a device that is connected, then there are harms that potentially could be extrapolated down the track. So children online are those that are under the age of 13, according to COPPA in the USA. This is despite that in America, with immigration laws, children are sometimes considered those humans that are under the age of 21. So already we can see with the Federal Trade Commission's definition that there is some conflict on what is a child or who is a child. So under the age of 13, really, and what kind of impetus can this give organizations when they're designing systems? I would rather go to the CRC, in that which I just showed you with the United Nations. In Article 1 of Part 1, we're told that it is a human. A child means every human being below the age of 18. And that is the definition that we've espoused in the P2089 working group. The UNCRC focused on harm rather than promoting flourishing. And in the P2089, We've wanted to go one step further than that which is in the CRC. We've wanted to talk about children flourishing. It should never be enough that children just have the right not to be harmed. How can they flourish? And this definition is now sweeping Europe in many of the literature I have reviewed. How do we ensure humans flourish? And in particular, in this instance, how do we ensure children flourish? This is a snapshot of a game one of my kids were playing about 5 years ago. Webcam test page. During the game, there are opportunities to see yourself alongside the In the Night Garden characters using a webcam. Click OK to reveal your camera, to turn it on. A wake up Instagram account, rampant sex trafficking occurring on Instagram, child abuse and pedophilia, and much more. Comments on minors' photos, and even the question of parents posting photos of their children where it wasn't to a limited group. An extended case study looking at Hello Barbie. Was she listening? Who was listening? It's not to actually play a pointing and blame game today. It's rather to work with organizations. This is not about organizations failing to meet expectations. It's rather about moving on, as Moira said, to this new cultural awareness that we have. We can't do the things that we've been traditionally doing, especially if the new realm, our new online culture, our new digital culture is dictating that there is another way. So Mattel was providing a platform for users, children from the ages of 6 and above, recommended for their gaming Hello Barbie device, to be able to see what she was doing and to talk to Barbie and to record those conversations on Toy Talk. When a bunch of parents came together calling this out, Mattel decided to backtrack and remove the Toy Talk recognition software. But I believe different types of products are available on the market. They're Alexa in the disguise of toys. But where are our boundaries? And boundaries is a very important term when we're talking about design and systems. What are the interactions and what are the boundaries? So why is the code important? In this instance, we're talking about a UK code. The rights of children are routinely ignored in the digital world. In many cases, they're illegal. In almost every case, immoral in these particular contexts. This is work from the 5 Rights Foundation. Companies are actively creating ways to track behavior, as we mentioned, looking at smoking habits, sexuality, preferences, illnesses, social value, friendship groups, breakups, divorces, you name it. And in the case of children, more about how they interact with one another or with adults who are using the gaming environments or different online services. When is bedtime, being pushed further back and back. This also impacts not just the child, but those living with the child and how strict they are around guidelines and rules. A child's financial status, whether they have access to a credit card in an online environment, what they search, what they like, what they post. And as many people know, the gaming environment, knowing a child better than the child knows itself. We have a lot of research by psychologists identifying an age of awareness, and many psychologists have worked together with gaming companies to identify various stages of awareness at 3 years of age, at 5, at 9, at 12, and responsibility shifting over time, not based on an age marker because all children are different, but based on these general sort of principles about responsibility and at what stage a child can be fully responsible as they become an adult. And this is the case of much of the literature saying that children are not fully responsible for their actions online until they hit that magical 18 or above. Of course, they gain more responsibility over time, and parents and guardians and schools provide that impetus and that growth and confidence in the development of the child. But certainly self-regulation under the age of 18 is inappropriate as a default. So we can't blame the child and we can't blame the parents, and companies now and other stakeholders like regulators need to start taking responsibility and being accountable for the repercussions of some of the risks online. So 5 Rights also published this PDF. By the time a child is 18, it is estimated that there will be 70,000 data points about them. Companies know the children better than they know themselves, and they share that information with partners, alliances, and other preferred affiliations. This is on the supply side of the business. I want to fast forward now in the consciousness of time and talk about different products briefly. We're not talking about generally just games, but multimedia platforms, full-blown platforms that have, as Nishan said, effects that we may not be able to name at the moment, but may be named not as mental health issues, but potentially as a result of gaming addiction. Of course, games addiction is now in the disorder manual in the US. It has been identified, but other types of addictions online have not. And so we look at this kind of article, doctors point to TikTok as possible cause of tic development in teen girls. And I don't have to look at teen girls, I just have to look at myself. You know, I constantly am hearing a ting on the phone, or I'm constantly looking up at the phone to ensure, you know, a new message hasn't arrived, even when I hear nothing. So it is not just TikTok, it is not just our current psychologists that are pointing to things that may be named in the future, but products are not just tangible things. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's just actually visiting a website and interacting online. But then as we move into the space of more complex systems, like the Facebook proposed metaverse, which is talking about putting on technology, us being embodied within these devices, we become a part of them, then what is actually occurring is different. Our senses are more enveloped at this stage, and HCI becomes an important thing. If I was to say to you, I visited one installation at the Australian National Museum and wanted to partake in a service they were offering, which was an AR experience, an augmented reality experience of Antarctica. I was with my 10-year-old at the time, and I went to pay my money, and they said, stop, you know, we can take your money, but we can't allow you to come in. And that started a discussion back in 2018 about why my child was not able to go and visit that installation, that augmented reality service and product. And in fact, I was told it had to do with the dizziness. But in the States, where I've gone to many museums in Washington, DC, for example, I've never been told you can't. So there are different expectations, and there are different heightened awareness in different markets. And I think we're going to start to see some alignment, hopefully, over time as standards like P2089 are established and take root. So in the consciousness of time, I'm going to share in the chat a Jamboard link, and I'll do that in just a moment. Now, the Jamboard link, if you don't know what Jamboard is, that's okay. It's like a Google Sheet. In fact, it's a Google product. And in this instance, it allows you to do a lot of collaboration on a blank canvas. And if you click on that link that's in the chat, it should catapult you to a working space. And I'll give you a moment to get there. I'm very happy to say I'll share the PDF of the Jamboard and the different sheets we interact with today. If you wanted to pop in your email address either in the Jamboard on the last sheet, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. But I will provide for you the proceedings of our interaction. So I'm now in Jamboard, and again, for those who are just getting a coffee, the link should be in the chat, and once you click on it, you'll be catapulted into a shared space where we can collaborate. Now, in this environment, we have multiple sheets, so I can go right and left by clicking the arrow keys. But more importantly, if we stay on the first page, and the question I've begun with is, you've been tasked with building a children's app, who should you consult? Now, I'd love all your inspirational comments to come through, and that way we get a more robust picture. And you can be as detailed or offer one word if you wanted to in these exercises as we go through them. but this is to get you engaged in the design process, of which is stipulated in P2089. So that's the select key, it's an arrow key, but if I wanted to write something, I'd use the sticky note that's there on the left. So if I click on that with my left mouse button, it comes up and I might say children. If we're building an app for children, we should engage children. I'm going to press save, and I could have used a different color. You can choose any color you want. I'll hit save. And that allows me then to use the point and clicker to move this item, just like a sticky note, and to size it as big and small as I want. So I've started off. I wonder who you think should be consulted. And we covered a bit of that already, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. So the next step I'd like us to engage in, thank you for all those wonderful responses, is to start co-locating some of these stakeholder types. And what I'd like you to do is to shuffle around a little bit some of the contributions you've made. And if someone wants to take the pen, on the left-hand side, it's that device there that we select the first item there on that list, the pen. I can draw around anything I want to. I'll just use my eraser to get rid of that, but looking forward to seeing you perhaps lasso some of these like stakeholder groups. Okay. So we're starting to see the formation of some very interesting stakeholder types and some very interesting stakeholders. If we go through, we can see that people have mentioned, we go to children, we look at different age groups, perhaps we look at different cultural contexts, children and parents of various ethnicities, genders, races, religions, and socioeconomic status, parents, teachers, ministers, rabbis, priests, community elders, mental and social health professionals, referring to quality of life, for example, in gaming, children's wider ecosystem, as we said, peers and so forth, pediatricians and child psychologists, that's great, app designers of existing apps for children, the design team itself, subject matter experts, and then we've got this non-government organizations group. There could be advocacy groups around gaming or the upholding privacy, or they could be gaming addiction support groups, which are sprouting up all over the place, even parents groups, as they advocate for technology online with minimal harm, online safety groups and regulators, people responsible for GDPR enactment. We haven't even put perhaps law enforcement in there. We may have these kinds of representative stakeholders, even lawyers, as part of this, because this is what it takes, friends, to create a robust service. Now, without overwhelming companies, as they think if I adopt and use IEEE P2089, the proposed standard going forward, the recommended one, hopefully, do I need all these stakeholders? The answer is, it depends on the size and scale of what you're trying to do. If it's a transnational service, then certainly you require more stakeholders to come around the table. And the process does take time. We do need to provide adequate budget and adequate time to the design of services to do them properly. It's not about the mentality of moving fast and breaking things. It's actually about creating concerted design efforts that actually will yield both economic acclaim for the organization, but more so meet the needs and services. So we're shifting our mindset from purely commercialization to what we now term public interest technology, which was what last year's ISTAS was all about. So thank you for that contribution. We'll go to the next slide. And I want you to start brainstorming about greenfield. Greenfield means when I'm proposing a brand new service, system, or product for a child. So you've been tasked with finding an appropriate methodology to complement the design of a new children's app. Where do you start? And this is where I'd love to hear your thoughts about what kinds of data collection mechanisms might work. You know, you're researchers, so you should be able to contribute from your perspective, from your discipline, what you think might work. And Nishan mentioned that keyword of co-design. The whole philosophy behind co-design being we build with, not for. What kinds of words could you use to describe the method you might employ? Let's start that activity on this page. So I've gone to screen 2 or page 2. Lovely, someone's beaten me to it. That's a fantastic. I'm putting that really big. Others. A lot of the co-words, friends, are those which tend to be very interesting, like consultative, cooperative. I co-design. Impact assessment upfront, exactly. Fantastic. And usually, friends, as we're adding to this Jamboard, standards are considered to be static. They're not considered to be processes. And I'm happy to say, as we've created the recommended standard for approval in P2089, this standard is not boring. It's not a standalone, read this and you'll be all right. It's actually a process. It takes you through the stages of development. And if I skip for a moment to one of the Jamboards here, It's actually taking us through these different stages. There's a preparation phase. So whether I choose the co-design methodology as it is in the textbooks, for example, or I choose participatory design, or I choose inclusive design, or what's increasingly called human-centered design or privacy by design, it doesn't matter which methodology is espoused within the organization, because the organization may have its own kind of methodology. It could be an agile methodology, an experimental methodology. But in essence, independent of what methodology you're using or advocating, you go through these phases. You start to prepare, you start to brainstorm, you start to think, what are the services that people might require? You might do some early market research. You might be ideating at this phase. Then we go through these principles that are embedded, and then we operationalize the principles, because what we're trying to do is implement the age-appropriate digital framework, which is based on the 5 Rights organization and with the support of the sponsor, IEEE Consumer Technology Society. So it's a process that we're going through, and each of the stages has an input, it has activities, and then it has an output. And what we're doing is we're soliciting stakeholder engagement so that what we come out with is provable, it's auditable, it's transparent. Someone says, now, why did you create this in the service? And you say, we consulted with children, we consulted with other stakeholders, and look, we interviewed them, and here's the interview transcripts. Here's the process that we went through to pull out from the interviews those items that we believed were higher in priority and had minimal risk. And where we identified risks, we were able to respond to the risks so that we could mitigate them. And here's our treatment. Here's the way forward. And so we look at this as the preparation phase, as a register of ideas and thoughts. And then we look at the risks associated. And someone just said a wonderful thing, look up front at the risks, That's a great idea. You could do that as a preliminary technology assessment or preliminary child impact assessment with regards to online services. And so we go from the preparation, the ideation phase, the stakeholders, who are they, identifying who they are, just like we did a moment ago, engaging them, thinking of a timeline, a budget, whether this idea would actually fly, whether we can already see it doesn't meet the smell test or the fishy test or the TV test or the mum test in an ethical perspective. And where you're not sure, you continue to consult. You revise your ideas before you go to some kind of proof of concept even, where you're then going to a prototype after some testing and then implementing. So what we're advocating is do the homework at the front, make all the data collection available in a register, let's call it the age-appropriate register for digital systems, and then we look at risks, and then we identify how to overcome those risks. And if we can't overcome those risks, for example, if I go to this slide, I accept the risk and I accept the reward. I own the risk and I own the reward. I've identified that it's a low risk. But if it is very important to your service and it is a high risk and it's sitting somewhere there in this sort of nominal space, then what I might say, you know what? It's not worth it. Those things that require too much treatment response are too high in importance in my service, and the risk is too high. I just ditch, friends. I don't need to play in that space because I'll get myself into trouble. And most importantly, rather than the company feeling that it's all about them, it's getting the children into potentially a great deal of harm. One of the things we've done through research is identify different things. If it's an unintended consequence, it's probably sitting somewhere down here. If it's unanticipated, it means possibly we haven't done enough homework. And if it's a paradoxical consequence, that's altogether very difficult. So we're trying to ensure somebody's harm. And by doing that, we're creating new harms, right? That is also possible. But a lot of the discussion does not happen. And what we're advocating is for different roles to take on that responsibility. And if I go back to the standard itself, when we're looking at risks, we can overcome the risks, we place them and we identify them, we write them down somewhere. There's an evidence trail, there's an auditable trail. And we say we continually refine our services. No service that's launched into the public space is perfect. It can always be refined. And here we are talking about the operations of that service, as I said, the upgrading, the monitoring, and perhaps there comes a time where I decommission because the world has changed, as Nishan said. What was acceptable 25 years ago when we were just trying to connect to the internet may not be acceptable today or even in 5 years' time. So back to perhaps one more activity. And it's this one here. We're on slide 4. People around the room are ideating like crazy. So just picture us, picture your persona, your hat, and you're in this room and we're all together around the round table and we've come together for a workshop, an ideation workshop in design thinking. And the boss says, wow, these ideas are crazy. I think this is fantastic. Keep the ideas coming. And in your head, you feel like you're one of the only stakeholders in the room to think this rather sounds exploitative. You're feeling uneasy. And what do? Do you resign from your post? Do you resign from the working group? Do you offer up another way? And what is that way? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So again, some sticky notes. What would you do? Top contributions, friends. Fantastic. Fantastic. I think that gives us time for one more activity before we go to question time, if that's okay, Moira. People have said try to find tools to reference why some of the ideas may not be appropriate. Ask an idea how it fits to the standards internal to the organization, because organizations also have their policies, and then you might go to an external standard, ask the boss for feedback, talk in a small breakout room, a session with a peer, and consider it on the risk register, offer other ways and hopes to move on. So one more activity, if you may allow me to spoil you and you spoil me. Okay, you're concerned if you keep a register while you're in the preparation phase of the development of a new child service, that the organization you work for, let's say it's Facebook, will be very much exposed for their practice in not being conformant to PT089, the proposed standard, or something else. But you know, the right thing to do is to document the process from principles to operationalization. Should you sanitize your age-appropriate register? Here, a yes or a no could be a response, or a response in commentary. And this is the last activity. Excellent. I like that response. We're told here, don't delete, although some people will tell you in the organization to do so. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Moira. Thank you so much for everyone who contributed. Oh, we've got more coming. Here, no. However, highlighting, here we are. I've got to read these before I give over to you, Moira. What does one do if they discover this to be the case? Blow the whistle, as we have seen has been done recently. However, highlighting, proposing the efforts of processes that alleviate these non-conformities, exactly. And so I would say this is not a standard that's being proposed for penalties. Laws and regulations handle penalties. Standards, friends, are guidelines that you hope for some conformity, and that industry bodies together and industry together can say, this is the way forward. We can see a win-win here. And so in solidarity, we don't need to shame individual organizations, but rather as a group, if we are able to go down this path, then people who don't conform will feel out of place. And if I could say, this is a first mover advantage for those companies that can say they have implemented the standard in their organization. I would say thumbs up, and I'd prefer to use a service that is aware of this process than not aware. So with that, I'll stop sharing and hand back to Moira. Thanks, Moira.
Thank you, Katina. And this was really a great exercise. I think it made me think in depth and at a different level about what would I do and what should I do, and think about the different steps. So I thought that was really helpful in illustrating some of the concerns, and also showing that we hear a lot about these challenges, but there are ways to address them. And you have, I think, very clearly demonstrated that. It's take the big picture, take the stakeholders, think about all these things. And a lot of it is about thoughtfulness, about engaging with the right communities, the right principles, the right practices. And I think that actually gives one hope that good things can happen. I noticed in the comments during the chat, there were some references to Black Mirror and to the more dystopian side of things. And I think we see a lot of media coverage and a lot of shows that worry us and that show that more negative side. But thanks to some of the processes like the ones that your working group has identified, hopefully we can avoid some of those most negative outcomes and in fact move from just the avoidance of harm to the flourishing. I think that's a really important point as well, that we should aim for more than just avoiding harm. We should really aim for benefit and inclusion and positive outcomes. But I do want to offer room for questions, and I know since we're a small group, if somebody has a question, please let us know. I saw that there was lively dialogue in the chat, questions also being answered, so I'm glad that that was able to be done along the way. But is there a question now from anyone?
Hi there, I have a question. I don't really know how to formulate it in words yet, so I might muddle through it. This is Jason speaking, by the way. So I really love this this process protocol that has been designed, and I was just wondering, is there a length of time that is sort of a rule of thumb that people should spend on each phase in this process? And the only reason why I'm asking this is sometimes you get people in a room and you ask them to design and think about all these possible angles, but there's only so many directions they can go, and someone's saying we got to move on to the next phase. Like, how do you know when you've done enough, I guess is the question.
It's a great question, Jason. I'm actually running a live co-design course at the moment on smart city infrastructure and using persons living with dementia as our primary stakeholder instead of children, for instance. And I didn't constrain the delivery process within 15 weeks because we have a 15-week semester at Arizona State University, but rather I looked at designated timelines. And there are recommended timelines for each. But the first thing to remember is that while I may have presented this in a linear fashion, design is not linear. We all know that. However, in an organizational sense, there are stages and phases of development, especially when we're talking about experimental development techniques or even agile techniques. You want to go as fast as you can to prototype in these instances and then test, test, test. But if you haven't done any stakeholder engagement, that's the primary thing I would spend the majority of time on. You know, traditionally when we've looked at the traditional waterfall diagrams or system development life cycles, you know, there's this phase and then this phase. I worked for a corporation that went through these gates and were painstakingly 99.99999% availability because of the kind of infrastructure we were rolling out. But to go back to your question, it all depends on the budget you have. And I'm not devoid of understanding business world, right? If your budget is X, well, how many? It's better to have consulted some stakeholders than none. So a couple of children. But if it's a big service that's going to be transnational, commensurate to the size and scale of what you think you might get on a return on investment, I would inject the appropriate dollars, which then would talk about the appropriate time scale. But yes, move fast and break things, right? Is the Silicon Valley mentality, right? But this is not about moving fast and breaking things because we don't want to break our kids. We don't want to break children. You know, we were kids. Yeah. You know, we break these all the time, but just a short response there. I love your question.
Yeah, likewise. And thank you. Thank you. And we have come to the end of our time. So I just want to give a few pointers to a few more resources because we would love to have engagement from all who are here. If you are interested in contributing to any of the activities of developing or spreading the word of some of these resources of practices around this. So I just want to highlight a few things. So some things that you can do, you know, with us is get inspired by watching some of the great materials. And I think today, hopefully with these presentations, they were inspiring. We also have more materials, including I'm highlighting here one where Baroness Beeban Kidron from the UK House of Lords and from the Five Rights Foundation that Katina mentioned is speaking about, you know, the importance of designing for children and with children and making the digital world fit for children. I think that's a phrase that they use, but it's that ability to flourish. It really has to be provide that. But so there's a link to a session where she spoke. Join the activity that Nishan highlighted. Also, you can download the case studies report that we highlighted here. Or please contact me or contact any of the other speakers, and we would love to stay in touch with all of you and help you get involved in any of these activities that you might be inspired by. With that, I would like to thank our expert speakers and our attendees for your interest and participation, and wish you all a good rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good day, everyone. This is Moira Patterson from the IEEE Standards Association, and welcome